I really appreciate you giving me the chance to present here.
Yeah, hold it like that.
Okay.
All right, does that sound okay, guys?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. Well, I'll watch the chat here, and if there's some issue that comes up, I'll try to redirect. But yeah, I appreciate you guys letting me be here to present to you guys on Orondis. I think that Jim laid it out pretty perfectly. They were excited about this material, and I'm excited to present to you that I'll be through format. And so the topic was going to be Orondis application methods, because that did come up in the chat a couple times that this was of concern, and it is different than some of the other products in the marketplace. So getting it applied correctly is going to be really key to good success. So jumping into this, Jim had mentioned as a groundbreaking mode of action. Initially launched in citrus from we did achieve registration in late 2020 in those crops. Since then, we've added tree nest label and then avocado. So volume rate, so less waste, less material in the field, less jugs, all those kinds of things. Long-lasting residual control as well. This is both in profit and it's also extremely safe in new plantings. Some of these other materials might be a little harmful on beneficials. Some are also a little harmful on brand new plants. Specifically, something like Rhythm has a plant back in terms of easy plant approach from that time before you apply. This doesn't have any of that. So you can basically plant on Monday, apply this on Tuesday if you like. It also has a unique mode of action, like Jim mentioned as well, to Group 49. There's no resistance known to any other mode of actions out there. The active ingredient is oxypypepperine. It's highly effective for oomycete diseases, Picanoia, Avocado for known, talking here. And there's also no known species that exhibits any tolerance to Orondis as well. So it's very useful, a very highly effective tool, has a wide utility. It is a unique track group like state 49. It's an oxysterol binding protein inhibitor, which is essential function in phytophthora cells. But while very efficacious, resistance is a real concern. As these things go up and up very high in terms of their activity, which Jim mentioned, very low amounts has a very high range of activity. Sometimes these materials can be very easy to go around if they're used repeatedly or at low rates. And so we don't want to have that happen. That's why we have very strong things around resistance application methods and rates, but then we're also really pushing to get these new materials. Moving on, it's very effective not only in lower right hand side video, and the left hand side is Orondis. So we not only are protecting it from the system, the root system itself, from infection, but we're also reducing the inoculum load in the soil as well. So going to different products here, Rhythm Golden Cell is our product, and it's been around, like I say, Jim, for a long time. Has been used in a lot of different crops and still has a lot of utility. But how do they differ in terms of their use and solubility and all that kind of stuff? Rhythm Gold, the main mode of action is stopping mycelial growth and spore formation within the root system. Doesn't really have a whole lot of activity on the propagules in the soil. So it's basically, when applied, it's systemically brought up within that root system, and then you have a reservoir protection. So when that phytophthora penetrates the root, sporulation and mycelial growth should stop. Now, Orondis, on the other hand, does this through multiple different actions. It not only does stop sporulation and spread and degradation of root tissue, it breaks the cycle of propagules. Jim mentioned that too, that when we protect that root system, we stop this cycle of ever growing and this continual reproduction cycle. So that's what Orondis helps as well. And like I say, it goes into roots and can reduce the existing infection while lowering populations, leading to excellent residual control. So that's why we're really excited about Orondis because not only how efficacious it is, but then it provides a wide application window to get a really high degree of efficacy. Now, how do they differ in terms of solubility? This came up as well. How soluble is it in soil or in water and those kinds of things? Right on the left-hand side, very soluble in water. It's an SL formulation, very much like an EC. You put it in the water, and there's this white plume in there. It moves very freely. You almost don't need any agitation to get throughout it. This solubility continues on into the root zone as well. It moves freely in soil moisture throughout the root zone. It's mobile when applied to dry soil and then watered in. So, for example, a soil spray or shanking in, this is used quite heavily, so it will be rehydrated after irrigation and move throughout that root zone. And it's very, very vast and critical movement. So when you apply this material to the root zone, it shoots through. So it is very, very sustainable. One is on the other hand, is soluble, not as much as removable as cells in ST. So you put it in, it's still plumbed in water, but it does need a little more agitation to get it in solution. Standard agitation practices of filling the tank halfway, adding the rest of the water to it would be more than sufficient. It really only moves in water. It's not free water within the root zone. Jim just mentioned with a question is once that soil dries, just subsequent water move it again. It really doesn't. It's kind of set it and forget it at that point. That's why you want to apply correctly the first time if you can to get the best bang for a buck out of it. It binds the soil volume after application is done. Soil spray and chain treatments are not supported because of that reason. If we spray it on the soil and we don't have sprinklers going at that moment, it can bind to that soil and not move into the root zone. If we shank it in, which is common in some areas with other treatments, irrigations after that will not move it into the root zone, and so that application tends to be wasted previously. And it does have some but little movement upwards. So it gets taken up in the roots and starts to move up the tree a little bit, but to what degree we aren't exactly sure because it's such a low use rate product that it's getting it through chemical means. Now directions for use in root rot control and avocado. Jim had mentioned the 4.8 to 9.6 fluid ounce rate. We like the 6.4 ounce rate for two reasons. Number one is ease of use. So one case covers 20 acres. You don't have leftover material at the end or anything like that. And so people up north really like that square kind of thing there, or square usage they call it. And it also gives us a really healthy rate. So if we do have any issues with application, lack of efficiency of application or something like that, or lack of distribution uniformity through the injection system, we have a rate that's healthy enough to ensure we get good, adequate control of in the results. There are more than 2 applications per year, no matter the rate applied. Irrigation used. That's one of the structures we have around this product to make sure it stays here for years to come. Some products allow you a maximum use rate of X. You can do 5 applications as long as you don't overcome that level. Orondis is not that way. If you use 6.4 this time and 4.8 the next time, you're done to the next one. Nursery production is not allowed either, but Revis is being pushed through for use in avocado nursery production like it has been in citrus and some other crops we're working with. This is also about protecting the molecule too. Jim had mentioned methanoxam that was used in nurseries before, and it's having to be used at such a low use rate to prevent phytotoxicity that we're quickly inducing a tolerance with whatever propagules are present. So we want to preserve this molecule and have it for years to come, and that's where Revis is going to come in line in terms of nursery production. Let's see here. I mentioned that the rates. And then the one thing I'll leave you with is we are very concerned about resistance with this material, not only because it works so well, but because it works so well, like I mentioned before, if resistance comes in, it can come in pretty fast. We've seen this happen with other active ingredients, oomycetes especially, tend to really pressure chemistry heavily. And if it gets abused, then it can develop resistance to a degree. We don't know how fast, but we saw even with potassium phosphite, it was marketed as resistance is never going to happen. It's not going to be a problem. but taking up properties of the soil, we do have resistance out there. And so we want to make sure we don't have that happen again with something like oxidized or support application methods and cautions. We support mitigation applications via sprinkler or drip applications only. And the following reasons are why. And Jim mentioned one of them is that roots only go where the water's at, right? And if we do a soil spray across the whole soil volume under the tree, or let's just say we do a banded application, all those areas that don't get incorporated with water don't have any roots to be there. So we're losing efficacy due to a volume perspective of material. And then we also will have, like, say, tie up and lack of efficacy, which then put pressure on resistance as well. It delivers the water, like, say, in solution, bypassing the soil tie up, so it can go right into the soil, right where you need it. Much more efficient than hand applications or herbicide rigs, like I mentioned before. Plus, you don't have any cost. This is just going with irrigation water, so you don't have the cost of labor or PPE or anything like that you might need. Concentrates it in the wet area where roots and phytophthora are present, and you get that soil volume up or ratio up. And it's cheaper to apply. Like, say, the gentleman mentioned earlier in the meeting that you guys have a lot of stuff on the side of hills and things like that, which is kind of a worker safety issue. And if we're out there retaining, trying to spray something like that, not only will we get poor efficacy, but we will also potentially exposing us to risk that we don't need to expose ourselves with if you use it. So I've showed this before. This is a guy applying this via a drench of sorts. Again, the expense and the labor needed to do this, not only in terms of fill-ups and watering, can be a lot. And I also get the question too that they say, well, we got new replants and we go tank them in, do all this kind of stuff, which is great. But when we put a little well around this tree and we irrigate it, more oftentimes than not, we're filling that well up, or we're putting water on such a high amount of volume that we're overcoming the infiltration capacity of the soil. So we fill it up. It doesn't really go that far in terms of wetting the plug of that plant or the surrounding soil volume. So then you end up having a lot of Orondis in the top 2 or 3 inches, but nothing below that. And subsequent irrigations afterwards aren't really going to move that down. And then if we plant on berms or hills, like we had mentioned with some of these new resets, that water is just going to run off the edge of that thing too as well, not provide what you want. Another one is a herbicide rig. We all have these here, right? I totally understand we want to use that too. But as I mentioned, that's applying it to probably some dry soil. It's dry enough to get in. It's probably too dry for Orondis to be applied to soil. And then you have wet area patterns that are not linear. They are circles out there or drip patterns. So there's a lot of stuff being applied to dry soil that doesn't have any roots in it and will not be hydrated to be used. So therefore, that per unit volume of soil has a very low rate. And here's another thing we did too. This is just another benefit to doing widespread applications. This is some NDVI imagery. This is with another molecule being Ridamil in a different crop. But you can see on the left-hand side, July 9th of 17, they started doing applications of Ridamil in the fall and spring of 18. And then this is what we had at that same time the next year. If we had gone out and just treated, say, the red areas or the yellow areas, they would be very hard to find because they're really hard to see without a bird's eye view. But we would not have the implication field-wide or benefit out of the application if we had spot treated. You can see that we had an overall uplift on this field as comparison to the year before. That was not only measured here, but was also very visual on the ground as well, and really came through in fields too. So the end result of that is that we may not be seeing issues in other parts of the field, but it doesn't mean phytophthora isn't a problem. That might be reducing yield or overall tree vigor. It just hasn't manifested itself enough to cause leaf loss or anything like that, or fruit drops. So keep that in mind as you're going forward. The mitigation run times came up as well. Like say with Ridamil, we often used to say run like nitrogen, right? Towards the end of the set. We don't have the downsides of being tied up in soil, so it tends to move very well with that irrigation and subsequent other ones. Orondis not as soluble. We want to make sure that we have enough water within that soil volume and the system to plant through. The first third of a set is if it's short. A lot of guys up here will run short sets, especially in the springtime, because they don't need a lot of water. So let's just say the set is less than 6 hours. You want to put in the first third. And make sure that we have that system come up to pressure for say half an hour, inject the material for another half, and give it no less than 4 hours afterwards to flush that out into the soil root zone. On average, there was some testing done years ago with evaluating how material ran through an irrigation system. And on average, it takes about an hour and a half from time of injection, point of injection, to make it all the way through that system and into the soil. That means it has to go through the underground, the drip tubing, all those kinds of things. Now, again, smaller systems might be shorter, bigger systems could be longer, but we want to make sure that we have that material in the root zone, because the only thing worse than having it tied up or pushed below the root zone is having it within the underground and not even making it to the field, period. So we want to make sure that happens. But again, if you have a longer set, longer than 6 hours, then we want to direct that application towards the latter half of that. Again, injecting it and letting it run 4 to 6 hours afterwards to flush that out of the system and into the root zone. So if it is applied wrong, this was alluded to as well. It will be reduced or not present in terms of efficacy. This is more dramatic in deeper rooted crops like tree nuts. But avocado, you do have an advantage. They are shallow rooted, close to the surface, so it doesn't have a whole lot of movement to travel. Adjuvants have been shown to show some effect. I know there are some of those out there too, but they haven't had enough effect to overcome poor application methods. So they do enhance the efficiency of movement through soil a little bit. It's not enough to overcome a poor application. And then you also have that second application if you had to. Let's just say the first one doesn't give us exactly what we need. The second one is there to reduce the pathogen load as the trees get bigger as you go through the growing season. So that's one of the benefits there, is that we do have that second application if we do need to use that. And then we'll talk to the Florida citrus in terms of application as well. We've had both of those happen where they irrigated beyond the root zone with a long set. And then we've also had times where they've irrigated only a 3-hour set, and that material is very good in the top inch or two of soil in terms of controlling crocules. But below that, we got no inhibition at all because it just didn't move through the soil. It was put on top and was never irrigated down with subsequent irrigations this fall. So conclusions, it's really, I think a lot of this is redundant considering what Jim had talked about, but lasts a long time. A unique mode of action is in classes zone in terms of not only efficacy, but the worker safety and return on investment for the grower. Yield had come up quite a bit as well, and reducing something like Phytophthora should only go in the positive in terms of decreasing yield. So that's a benefit here. We can handle this with care as well and make sure we follow restrictions and rotate with different products at different mode of action, i.e. something like red knuckle, phosphide is efficacious, and then these other materials that are coming down the line. Application is key. Making sure it's wet prior to application is also good, because if we have a very, very dry soil, that 6 hours is good as far as it had a little bit of moisture as well too. So those are something to keep in mind, so that way we can get the most out of any application for us we might have. So with that, I got some pictures here of a trial that was actually out with Jim Sprain years ago. He and I talked about that the other day, and I dug through some paperwork and tried to find it. He's done these pictures with some students, so this was kind of fun. Going all the way back to, I want to say 2016 or 17, we were looking at avocado stuff. So, in the essence of time, I wanted to get you that through.
You have a question here,
Do you have a more specific regime for avocados? I mean, you say 6 hours. Given a 6-hour irrigation, at what time would we inject?
So let's just talk about a 6-hour. We have a 6-hour irrigation, and that's it. You're looking at that Orondis isn't super mobile, and let's assume that an hour and a half general rule that we see, and that general rule is from application point to the end use of the field. I would like it come up to pressure, make sure that system's up to pressure for about a half hour, 45 minutes. The injection takes another 45 minutes to an hour possibly, so that gets us to about 2 hours, and then we let it run another 4 hours to flush that out and into the root zone.
So Gary, there was a question earlier in the chat about, can you detect it in the fruit?
Yeah, I saw that there. I'm glad you reminded me, Mary. It's one of the things, to get a product registered, we have to do all of these different applications and residue studies and things like that. I don't have those numbers specifically in front of me, but what I will say is that I would be very suspect if we found any little, if any, in the fruit at all, because as Jim had mentioned, it does move up, but it doesn't move up nearly like Ridamil does. And in using mefenoxam, for example, we have trouble finding mefenoxam sometimes in the fruit too. And so, and even in small containerized plants, when we apply this to the root system, we take leaf tissue up in the plant higher. We cannot scientifically find it, but Jim maybe can jump in here. But when we take plant residues or extracts, it does inhibit phytophthora growth, but it's at a level so low that we can't detect it chemically. So while I can't say you won't find any residue in avocados, I would assume it's probably very low to none.
Maybe come and stand by the speaker.
Yeah, so Garrett, I'm gonna add in here that, you know, the rates that we're using are so low. And when I showed that systemic movement in the plants, these were potted greenhouse plants of citrus that are maybe 6 to 8 inches tall. So it is moving in there, and you can dramatically show that. But when you talk about an avocado tree and we're applying it to the roots, it's not really, there's not enough product to get it all the way up into the leaves and into the fruit from a soil application. Because even if we use it at, like Garrett said, 6.5, so you get your 20, your 20 acres per case. There's just not enough material to get it pushed all the way up into a big tree, into the fruit. So we have looked at that and we never found it in the fruit. So that's the message.
Any other, Gary? Just so we have another question.
Yeah.
Just a second.
Oh, he's getting that. Let me just say, we did do yield studies on citrus. Now, this is where we actually showed that, when we planted a new citrus orchard, we can get a higher productivity and hundreds of pounds more fruit in 3 years after we started the trial. So these things really are dramatic when you're really starting out fresh with a new planting. And we have shown yield benefits. I just haven't done that with avocado.
So we're gonna have a question here, Garrett.
Yeah, okay. Fatima mentioned applying gypsum on the soil and up to 6 inches of mulch on the soil and dry wood chip mulch. I assume that as long as that's wet, it'll go right through that stuff.
Yeah, there hasn't been any tie-up activity with soil amendments or fertilizers outside of something like CAN 17. It's been very forgiving. We've also done a lot of testing in high calcareous soils as well that are high in both calcium and sodium, and haven't seen any reduction in efficacy in those when applied correctly. So I don't see any reason why applying it through mulch or a layer of gypsum would be any problem. Okay,
another question. Have you done any work with pH of the water or pH of the soil, if that reduces the efficacy?
We have done a lot of pH work. What I will say, it's fairly stable, but most pHs that are good for soil will be fine for Orondis. When I say pH, I do a lot of work with applications with lime and other crops too. They're applying it for something like brown rot and septoria and stuff. And even pHs up into the 9-10 range, while not ideal, Orondis is still pretty stable. And so if we had 9 or 10 pHs in your neck of the woods, we'd have a lot more problems other than Phytophthora. But even going down that lower pH range to the acidic range, it's worked very well as well. So I don't see any issues in terms of chemical stability or efficacy with pH. Now, what I will say is that high pH soils tend to have a problem with water infiltration commonly. Due to things like bicarbonates and soil structure, that will inhibit Orondis' efficacy just through physical movement. But if we have some of those things taken care of, chemically, I don't see a problem with Orondis working in those situations.
Just real quick, with the application, getting back to Gary's comment, if you got to know your orchard, if you've been mulching for the whole lifespan of the orchard, and most of your roots are a good proportion of your roots are in that mulch as it escapes, you're going to probably do this, this watering technique to get it into that mulch and maybe a little bit into the soil, but you're not going to put it in 6 hours of water following that if most of the roots are in the mulch. So you have to there's some art to chemigating, as we know, and if most of your roots are there and you've been mulching extensively, your goal is to get it into where most of the roots are. So that's a little bit of vague information, but that's the goal. Okay.
They're asking days to harvest.
Oh, they want to know the post-harvest interval, Garrett.
Yeah, so the PHI, it would be 30 days.
Yeah, pre-harvest, 30 days. And there's any reason why it's 30 days if it doesn't go into the fruit?
There's a lot of things that go into that. They're scientific in that, yes, it doesn't really go into the fruit, and we're very confident with that. But then there's also a much bigger game being played in terms of politics and just ecological reasons as well. So years ago, we went through, and there were things like Ridamel didn't have a PHI on it for things like citrus and avocado. It just wasn't on the label. And through EPA's increased view on things and DPR as well, we basically went through with a blanket statement that for soil applications on all these new products, that we will set them 30 days just to minimize any potential application of fruits on the ground, stuff like that. It was something, a bargain we made with them. That's why the 30 days came up.
So I have a question for you. So you said 2 applications a year timed with the root flush. So major root flushes in California occur from approximately late April, early May through about mid-June. And then again, starting in late August through about early October. So having like 2 months in between those 2 major root flushes is all right for those 2 applications?
Yeah, that's not a problem. So the minimal application interval is 30 days. So you can apply this day 1, and then 30 days later, you can apply the second application if you want to. So it's 30 days for both of those, the PHI and then also the interval of application.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any more questions? Do we have any more questions on the chat, Lorena? Thank you very much, Garrett.
Thank you guys very much.